I'm delighted to be joined by Nuria Khan, who is herself an ex-Muslim and a women's rights activist. Nuria, talk to me about the treatment of women in Islam as a whole. Is it the case that in most Muslim relationships, the woman is seen as secondary to the man?
Holistically, absolutely, yes. So, I mean, if you look at the main tenets of Islam, there's a very rigid set of rules for the definition of marriage and, in fact, the definition of what a male and a woman should kind of adhere to within that marriage. And then it goes further and comes straight from the Quran, where it gives an element of superiority and authority to the male. And the reasoning behind that is that he should be the provider and the breadwinner. But as a result, women get kind of, as you said perfectly, like they are second-class citizens within their own marriage, but also within a wider Islamic society itself. And then there's, you know, if you delve further into that, the concept of marriage becomes problematic in the sense that things that we consider legal here and criminal activities such as marital rape doesn't exist within the Islamic literature itself. Divorce is not something that women can seek independently if they were to abide by the traditional Islamic narrative. So countries have allowed for women to appeal to courts now to get a divorce, but that is called a khulla, and that is something that has come into the fold quite recently. It's not something that Islam itself allows. So you've got this unilateral power that's given to men. So again, you can see the power dynamic is completely off from the get-go.
You're an ex-Muslim. Talk to me about your experiences as a Muslim and what led you to leaving the religion.
Sure. So essentially, I was brought up in a, typical conservative Sunni Muslim family. So with that just came, I guess, the normal things side by side to your normal schooling. You'd attend mosque and Quran classes, and you'd be taught about Islam and things like that. So you'd be encouraged to do things like wear hijab or follow kind of the tenets of Islam as you get older. But again, because I was growing up in London, it was kind of a mix of both worlds that I was subjected to. It was only when I left the UK and kind of experienced life in Saudi Arabia, and then beyond that in the UAE, where I saw kind of a different flavor of Islam and saw, slightly Wahhabi elements of Islam and how they interpret it and how general life is in a strict Islamic country, that I kind of had the other side exposed to me. So I was kind of just teetering between what is Islam and what's the Islam that my parents follow. So we kind of just charted a I guess, semi-conservative course in that sense. So I wasn't forced to wear hijab, but I chose to wear it off my own volition because that's what my Quran teacher at mosque encouraged me to do while I was still in London, and I was 9 years old. So again, most people, that's naturally implied at home within your families. And thankfully, I didn't have that little element, but I chose to do it myself regardless because it was the right thing to do. And obviously, naturally, as a young Muslim woman, I wanted to go to heaven. So yeah, it was kind of just seeing a mixture of Islamic experiences and then having a run-in with Sharia law myself as a grown Muslim woman, kind of dealing with a divorce and trying to get myself out of a certain situation. The full force of Sharia kind of fell down on me, and that's what it took for me to look into actually what Islamic law prescribes for women and what that means pragmatically. And that's kind of what really opened my eyes when I went back to reading the sources instead of just listening to what I was told and fed as a child. I had kind of studied elements of Islamic law, so I looked into it with a lot more of an open mind, and I had a safe space to do that because growing up in the Middle East, everything was kind of policed. Couldn't even Google actual Islamic sources or valid criticisms of them because, the web was obviously, you're not allowed to do that in Saudi Arabia or Dubai. And if you do, you could get into a lot more trouble because everything is really heavily monitored.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got
on how to discipline his wife within a marriage, and that alludes itself to domestic violence, which is actually within the Quran itself, Surah 434, which is a surah of the verse of women, and it tells you exactly how to discipline your wife, and that becomes incredibly problematic because the discipline that's ordained is just merely if you fear disobedience. It's just, a general paranoia that a husband could have, for instance. And then, like I said earlier, the unilateral right of divorce is only available to men. So actually women have no get-out clause if you go by the Quran itself. And then the background I come from, Sunni Islam, which is the major sect of Islam, the Sharia tenets are derived from the Quran itself, but also the Sunnah, so like the way of life of the Prophet. And he goes on further there to, call women impure, deficient in intelligence. The impurity relates to the fact that women menstruate, and so you're not allowed to pray or fast during menstruation. So they take something as simple as like a normal bodily function and they turn it into the most loathsome, kind of thing that women should be vilified for. And again, the deficiency in intellect comes down to the Prophet's ruling that a woman's testimony is half of a man's. So you've got all of these things combined with custody. Custody in Islam is once the child becomes 7, regardless of the best interest of the child, it just automatically goes to the man. So yeah, those are kind of the main things, but we could delve deeper into any of those that you'd like.
What I'd like to ask you is what the Quran says about non-Islamic women, especially because in the context of what we're talking about now, and we'll get on to that a bit later, but broadly speaking, whether or not having a huge influx of men from completely different cultures to our own is having an impact on women's safety, or is seeing an increase in sexual harassment. So I'm interested to know what the Quran says about how a Muslim man treats a non-Muslim woman.
Yeah, so directly, again, from the Quran, you've got the verse which addresses Muslim men. The whole Quran pretty much addresses Muslim men anyway, but the verse addresses Muslim men and it asks them to cover up their women. So that relates to only believing men and believing women, essentially, which are Muslim women in these cases. So within that verse itself, it says to veil your women and make sure they're covered so as to not be harassed. And essentially, that allows for all of this leeway where non-Muslim women who aren't covered or veiled in the same way are allowed or fair game to be kind of harassed or intimidated in the streets. And this is backed up by Islamic history. If you look into it, and if you look into the very origins of the hijab, it was to be able to differentiate as a marker between Muslim women and non-Muslim women in the history of kind of when they would go in to do night raids, or where they would, go into other villages or kind of have these battles. They would take the women that they were visibly not Muslim women, and all kinds of sexual violence would be perpetrated against those women. And you've got Islamic scholars, one of the most famous ones from the subcontinent, who's been banned in a lot of countries, but a lot of countries still welcome him, Dr. Zakir Naik. I think he's been banned on Peace TV and Islam TV here in the UK. But he openly says if a woman is not wearing the Muslim veil and it's okay to harass her, or she should not complain if she is molested or harassed. So it completely sets this delineator between Muslim women and non-Muslim women. And that's why you see elements of that appear in the grooming gang cover-ups as well, where disproportionately we see white working class girls being targeted, and the things that they were being called during these horrific, acts of sexual violence, the terms that they were being shouted at and screamed at, and the verses of the Quran that were being used to justify the violence against them all kind of stems back to this hijab concept and the concept of veiling and differentiating.
Statistically, when you look at countries that gather this data and publicise this data, it would appear that there is a trend between inward migration, particularly from countries where the culture is predominantly Muslim, and a huge increase in sexual harassment, rape, so on and so forth, particularly when you look at the statistics on rape specifically. Do you think that that there's a potential that we could be seeing a similar phenomenon here in the United Kingdom?
I would say absolutely, because it's twofold in my opinion, because you've got, as you said, people coming from cultures where a lot of these things that I alluded to earlier, things like marital rape don't exist within the confines of Islam. Things like consent don't exist within the confines of Islam. let alone what the kind of understanding we have of it now. So you've got a huge problem in terms of, a massive culture clash and a massive clash of values altogether in terms of how they view women. But the issue is it goes back to indoctrination. So you've got, let's say, young men who have, absolutely no regard for a woman's body or autonomy or agency. And they think that, for example, a woman sitting with her legs open is asking for it, quote unquote. Or if you're wearing a miniskirt, you're asking for it, quote unquote. But then the other side as well is that you've got this propagation of Muslim women who, again, have been indoctrinated from such an early age to think that they need to be covered up, and anything less than that is also them inviting this to happen. And so they, again, as a believing Muslim woman, you're going to want to cover up and not take part in this moral sin. But what it does is it reinforces the belief that these men have, that they should only be seeing women who are covered up, and that's the only way that they can respect them. I mean, we know that even in Islamic countries, when women are covered from head to toe, there's still sexual abuse and sexual violence that goes on. I've seen it firsthand in Mecca itself, which is the house of God. But yeah, you've got this kind of Stockholm syndrome almost happening with Muslim women as well, which are reinforcing the beliefs of these Muslim men or men coming from Islamic cultures, for them to think that anything other than that is so foreign and in their mind debased as well. So yeah, I think that it's no surprise that when people with such starkly different, and I would say diametrically opposed views come into the country, you're going to see a rise in all kinds of sexual violence.
It's interesting to me that so often the custodians of tolerance, the people who really want to push the agenda that we mustn't be racist, we mustn't be xenophobic, we mustn't criticize different cultures or religions, are so often middle-class white women. And I think to myself, if they understood some of the things you've been saying, they wouldn't do this. Do you think that they have got Islam wrong?
They've definitely got Islam wrong, because if they knew the true Islam, just the way that you and I are talking about things that are extremely problematic within it, then they wouldn't be, so readily holding up placards and, calling for Islamophobia to be made into legislation of its own right and things like that. So once you peel back the layers of, from the outset, seeing the bigotry of low expectations, if you will, of, this is their culture, or their values are different, or this is just Eastern culture in itself, then you really, can see how women and girls from Muslim households, like I was born in one myself, I kind of understand there's a lot of coercion and, emotional manipulation behind the scenes, whether it's from your elders or from the teachers in the mosque, or peer pressure from other Muslims, or the community policing in itself. And that strips away at the agency and the autonomy and everything else that they think that Muslim women have. And I'm not saying that all Muslim women are victims of this. Some very much are probably wearing the hijab and the burqa off their own volition. But primarily that's few and far between, and those are women who have been raised in the West and they know they've got added protections to help them. But in general, I think if, like you said, if the middle class kind of, I guess, liberal value champions were to read the Quran verse for verse, or just read the verse of women that's dedicated to women, that in itself can give you a sneak peek into how problematic Islam is for women. And then maybe they wouldn't be so kind of just trying to stand by them, when actually that's at the detriment of every other kind of group in society. Because the second that we give special pleading and we give these these pushes and nudges into legislation for why we think Muslim women need to be more protected, or because they're more vulnerable than other minority women or something like that, it becomes very, very problematic when we have movements coming out of heavily Islamic countries where there is theocracy, and those women are saying we have zero rights, we don't have the right to education, we don't even have the right to speak loudly or laugh loudly, and I'm alluding to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in this situation, where they have completely erased women from society. Now, you can be, living comfortably in the UK and be a middle-class white woman and think that this is a problem that only happens in theocracy. Well, this is exactly what we would get here if we were to allow this to run amok.
Do you think as well that among some sections of the Muslim community that white women are a free-for-all, that they're sort of exoticized because they have that, the access because they don't wear the hijab or the burqa or they're non-Muslim, but also because of the prevalence of porn culture?
Oh, I hate to say it, but absolutely, yes, absolutely. And I mean, this starts from like the grassroots level of if you were to be, let's say, in, just privy to, let's say, locker room talk or talk within groups of Muslim young men, you would already see the kind of denigration of white women in their eyes in terms of, we can mess around and have a good time with all of these women, but then we'll marry a good Muslim wife. And that's kind of the general MO of most young Muslim men, I would say young British Muslim men as well, when they want to have their fun. That's the kind of, like you said, whether it's porn, the result of porn having fetishized them more, but then also Islam in itself. And if you go back to, again, Islamic history, there have been expeditions where Muhammad has been riling up his followers to go and conquer new territories and, capture blonde-haired women. So it very much goes back all the way to Islamic history in itself and the Prophet's view of these women and then how it carries on. And of course, as you said, porn has just only reinforced that.
How prevalent do you think those attitudes are within Islamic culture in the UK or in the Western world?
I would say it's very prevalent. I would say that. It hurts me to say that, but I would. And that's why it was infuriating when, the kind of lens was not shed on that aspect of things with the whole grooming gang scandal and the cover-up, because it's very much linked to that notion of these who are the most vulnerable segment of society that we can target, and who does our religion give us the justification to target in that sense. And that's where that came together. So that's not a time to be worried about being called racist or Islamophobic. That's where you need to tackle the problem head on, because they are disproportionately targeting a certain type of vulnerable young demographic. And those are always, with Islam, it's women and children that, are the first casualty.
Okay, so what do we need to do now in the United Kingdom? What is the solution to this problem?
I'm happy to be one of the, I hope thankfully there's more and more of us now coming out, but I'm happy to be one of the voices of dissent that say we really, really need to clap down on how Islam is kind of infiltrating every aspect of society here, and the amount of pandering that we've been doing over the last few decades has got us to this point where now we effectively, if things continue the way they are, so the government are paying lip service in the sense that they're saying violence against women and girls is going to be treated on the same level as terrorism. It's like a national emergency. And I completely agree with that. But then if we've got all these organizations and grassroots charities and NGOs who refuse to accept that Islam is actually one of the leading causes of at least a prevailing mindset of why assimilation or integration or women and girls are not protected in the right way, then this is something that we actually have to tackle beyond lip service. So we need to look at what's being said in our mosques, what are the sermons that are being said in Arabic as well. And some of these wider central London mosques have sermons in Arabic. That's ridiculous. So like France and other countries have now kind of woken up to the fact that Italy as well, that everything needs to be in English. So everyone's aware of the kind of message they're putting out to, especially like second and third generation British immigrants, children of immigrants who we'd expect to have kind of become more British at this point. But instead we see a regression. And that's when it becomes horrible for when you talk about Vogue or trying to end Vogue in this country, because you're channeling out young Muslim men with that same mindset that they would have in Islamic countries. And then yet you're trying to protect women and girls from that same very thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do with really, really kind of pushing back against terms like Islamophobia, really getting serious about how we end violence against women and girls. Whichever religion it may come from, if there is a religious text that endorses domestic violence or says this is a God-ordained solution to marital problems, and we refuse to accept that when we're trying to deal with these cases. And I work in the sector, and I've seen that Muslim men actually quote the Quran verbatim as their right to, beat their wives black and blue. And again, all the way back from Muhammad's time, you can trace that this has been happening. So it's a famous hadith as well in in Sunni Islam that Muhammad's youngest wife, Aisha, child bride, said that no women suffer more than the believing women because they are allowed to be disciplined in that way. So whether you're talking about non-Muslim women like we were earlier, you're completely at the behest of being one of these sexual victims because, again, the ideology allows that. But on the flip side, Muslim women as well have no get out and they are allowed to be beaten and it's justified.
Since you have left the religion and you seem to be extremely westernized, as a result, have you found that you've been subject to harassment? Have you been subject to inappropriate behaviour?
For me, it was more the speaking out against Islam, but coming from the community itself, the behaviour is kind of doing anything in their power to silence you or to not speak the ills of, let's say, the community or the religion. So at the beginning, I got plenty of kind of the same way that, I'm sorry, Sib, it's the same way that they would treat a non-Muslim woman, exactly like what you were saying. So the level of kind of sexually perverted threats became more commonplace because I'm no longer in the fold, so I don't need to be respected or protected, or as Muslim feminists, which is such an oxymoron, but like they like to say, Islam treats them like queens, which is absolutely ridiculous. But the fact that I've lost that privilege now, let's say by leaving Islam or exiting the fold, I'm very much fair game, like the rest of, like non-Muslim women would be, except if I revert to Islam. So because there's always that, I've had some really, really dark comments about I will rape you and bring you back to Islam. Or sorry, am I allowed to say the R word?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So in terms of that, we'll rape you or I'll marry you and you'll be my fourth wife and I'll bring you back. So it always has this condition of we'll perpetrate this violence against you and we'll kind of bring you back into the fold as a result, you're not going to get out of hand. But yeah, this is exactly the mindset that they perpetuate towards non-Muslim women. Yeah.
For life in the United Kingdom as a woman, my experience has been that it's changed dramatically. Even when I'm living in West London, in the last 3.5 years, I feel it's changed dramatically, that when I walk down the street, I get harassed, I get leered at in a way that I didn't used to. And I just wanted to know whether that is something that you're also experiencing, that when you go about life, I don't particularly dress immodestly, but when you go about life, you're an extremely attractive woman. Are you finding that you are having unwanted attention, and is that coming from a certain subset of society?
Oh, thank you, by the way. That was very sweet. So I come from a similar part of London to you, and I have literally seen the kind of metamorphosis of, simple things like going on a night out. How would you plan to even get from home to, let's say, the tube or whatever if you are? And like yourself, I don't really go out, dressing, showing loads of skin and stuff. Maybe that's my Islamic background that I haven't been able to shed fully. But I find it extremely uncomfortable, and I don't really put myself in those positions just because of experiences that I have had. I would say, though, again, and this is the weird thing about this, people who, let's say, are not aware of my activism just by my skin color and the way I look, Muslim men, obviously you get catcalled and you get leered at and things like that, but I feel like they wouldn't cross that line. So again, I've got it from men of all kinds of ethnicities and nationalities, which is the reason, in general, that I kind of, put my safety first and I choose different routes, or I'd just Uber it directly. But I feel like Muslim men push it to a level, but if they think you are one of them, quote unquote, they do kind of draw the line at maybe a comment here or there, and then they'll leave it at that. Which again this is what I'm saying, people don't talk about this enough, of how differently they view white women.
Yeah, I also think, it's a favourite term of the left wing, isn't it? Lived experience. And I have started to wonder, the more I ask people about this and talk to people about this, whether my lived experience as a blonde-haired woman is different to other people's lived experience. Certainly, having just come back from Morocco, a country that I really love, it's like flies to flypaper, it'll moth to a flame. It's a sort of, it's almost an encouragement. If I walk down the street with long blonde hair, it seems to be a sort of a siren call.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to bring this back, but to touch on your point about porn earlier, it's also because a lot of these Muslim men have watched porn, and the majority of women that they've seen in porn are blonde-haired women. And so therefore, again, with no concept or no understanding of how you should, like how we treat one another in normal society, they project that into real life. And they actually think that white women are looser, or white women have, looser morals, or they're asking for it by virtue of the way that they dress, or just because of their culture is not as rigid or one that is Islam. So just another major thing within Sharia law that, completely keeps women, I guess, hostage, or as I would say, a woman in Islam is like a perpetual child, and you're never given your own agency or kind of your own freedom. So there is something, and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Cooperation countries, they do this very well, but they have something called the guardianship system, or the wali system in Arabic. And essentially, why again this is so problematic with the creeping Sharia that we've got within the UK, or the councils that have been set up, is that once you start having that operate within the scope of Sharia, a woman is, for example, there was a woman from Jordan in the UK trying to seek an Islamic divorce, and because she had no male relatives, like close male relatives, she wasn't able to get a divorce and remarry until she flew to Jordan to get the permission of a 7-year-old cousin of hers, boy cousin, to say that I give permission for her to get married. And then she came back to the Sharia Council in the UK and presented it at the council in Birmingham. And I'm saying things like this, where a woman has to go to like literally somebody way down in your family tree who is completely not connected to you, nothing to do with your life. This is how derogatorily women are viewed in Islam, that some random 7-year-old boy could have more agency over your life, of such a big life decision as marriage and divorce, than you do yourself. And I think that's also something that's not really talked about enough with, the councils are enforcing this, or anybody who is letting women go through these processes in Islam will keep them kind of shackled in the sense that you will never have free reign or free autonomy, or you'll not even have any access to laws on an equal footing as an adult female.
Our mission
More and more